Welcome to Haldanes Law Matters. Thank you. Ian, in Winter, it's a pleasure to have you here.
My pleasure, Jonathan. Thank you for inviting me.
No, well, thank you for coming along. I should introduce you as Ian Winter, KC.
Yes.
But more importantly, perhaps, saxophonist.
Yes, indeed.
Racing driver, or rally racing.
Rally racing, yeah.
And very keen cyclist.
Try to, but I haven't cycled the peak yet. But that's
No.
on the list. It's on the list to be done.
All right, that's to come. So it occurred to me when I was thinking about what we might discuss to put this proposition to you, that very often lawyers are accused of being mercenary, and I don't think we'll deal with that side.
No, if we could put that on one side, if you wouldn't mind, yeah.
And also that they're a little narrow in their outlook and boring. And I thought that you'd be a good candidate to discuss whether lawyers as a whole are boring, given your background. So what do you think about that?
Right, so you're looking at me then to be Exhibit 1 for the case that lawyers are boring, or possibly to refute that case.
If you don't mind.
Yes, well, I'll do my best. I think lawyers essentially are not boring. It's just that the persona in court tends to give rise to that sort of image, and obviously image is very important these days. Plus, I think the modern way of litigating is a much more boring way of litigating. In the old days, you just stood up and made some brilliant oral submission. And these days, you have to write 500 pages. And the difficulty is, because it's easy to knock out 500 pages and quite difficult to knock out 5 pages, these submissions are very long and very boring. And I think we're losing the skill of nailing the point in short form. And that comes hand in hand with being a bit boring, to be honest.
Yes. I'm going to talk to you a bit more about court work. But before we do, tell me, if you will, something about one of my passions, actually, which is music. So tell me something about your saxophonist.
Yeah, well, I play the tenor sax. I have done for over 30 years, and I'm a jazz musician. I'm currently playing with the Michel Dries Jazz Tap Brazilian project, which is fascinating and I think unique group that we have, that we play jazz with a tap dancer. The tap dancer effectively operates as a percussive instrument in the band, but it gives a visual element to the gig. And we're about to record an album, 10-song album with that. The problem is that it's really very difficult, very fast, and I need to spend quite a long time preparing for it. Right. But it's a fascinating project. We're going to have it videoed, and hopefully we'll get a DVD video album out later this year.
With a tap dance, it gives us a Latin flavour?
Yeah, Latin flavour, Brazilian flavour. We've got probably going to use 5 different tap dancers, a couple from England, 3 from New York. The real stars are New York stars. That's where tap dancing.
If I was younger, I'd volunteer, but...
Well, you can come along, Jonathan. We'd be delighted to have you.
So... And I think I'm right in saying, aren't I, that at some stage you've recorded some recorded music?
Yeah, I've done quite a lot of recording. In fact, I wrote some tracks when I was stuck in the 3-week quarantine in 2021.
In Hong Kong?
Yeah,
yes.
In Hong Kong. The headline track's called 21 Days. It's a
lament.
A lament, really, about being in solitary confinement for 3 weeks. So it gave me a bit of time to write some stuff. I recorded it with some excellent musicians here in Hong Kong, headed up by a fantastic guy called Skip Moy, and we've recorded a short EP, really, and we're about to go back into the studio in a couple of weeks' time before I leave here to put down another 3 tracks.
Fantastic. And are they available to the public?
They might be in future, but I haven't got around to doing the online web presence for it. But as soon as I can, then they will be available.
They're not on Spotify yet?
Not yet.
That's why I was looking the other night and I couldn't find you. That explains that. So that's the musical side of things.
Yes.
And I should say that I've heard you play.
Yes, you have.
And I've heard some recorded music, and
yes.
it's great. I mean, it fits my way of listening to music.
Thank you very much.
Good stuff. And I wish you well with your future career in
music.
Yes. How about the rally driving?
Well, rally driving, I did. I've done 3 international rallies, so each one was 20,000 miles long, from London, Sydney, London, Acapulco, and London, Alaska. And each of those is a fantastic experience, driving way too fast on gravel roads that they close, or at least they close until some poor Bolivian farmer who doesn't speak English crosses with his llamas, not having understood the sign that the road is closed. So a lot of fun, quite dangerous, and we did that for quite a long time, nearly 15 years.
And speaking of dangerous, that takes me on to bicycling, which is something I enjoy as well. I bicycle quite avidly in Mallorca when I get the chance.
Yeah.
And I think you've had the odd tumble. I think I saw a picture once of a knee after a tumble, which didn't look too good.
Yeah, unfortunately I came down a hill too fast in the wet and the tyres weren't in the best condition. So I took over the role of the tyre on the road, but I don't recommend it, to be honest.
All right.
Too old to fall off bicycles.
So it sounds to me as if you're already a good advocate for the notion that certainly not all lawyers have boring lives, and we do have lives outside the courtroom.
Yes, well, you certainly do, and most of the lawyers I know are not boring at all, and they all have alternative interests, as far as I'm aware. So I don't think it's true that we are boring.
And it's a huge tent as well. I mean, it encompasses plenty of extroverts and plenty of people that are introvert by nature.
Indeed, but most of even the introverts have got other interests. I think it's a type of profession that attracts people with multiple interests in life.
Good. Well, I'm pleased to hear that, and that's perhaps a plug for young people who are considering careers.
Absolutely. Certainly don't be put off by the prospect that it might be a boring life. It certainly isn't that.
The reverse. So now it occurred to me that there is a link to all of that, to something that's quite topical in Hong Kong at the moment, because there is discussion about introducing cameras into the courtroom. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in England you've already introduced it.
Yes, I mean, as usual with the English, we were the first to fix the absolute prohibition on cameras when sort of everybody else was thinking that they might be quite a good idea. We went the other way. In 1925, they passed a law that prohibited it. But a few years ago now, we abolished that law effectively, and there have been cameras in the Supreme Court and the Privy Council for some time now. And quite recently, they've introduced them for hearings such as pleas in mitigation and certain types of argument. I'm not aware, I think, of an actual jury trial being filmed yet, but it will happen.
It'll happen.
It'll happen soon.
Is it just criminal courts at the moment?
No, all courts.
Civil as well?
Yeah, civil courts as well.
I wouldn't have thought there was much of an audience for civil.
Possibly. I mean, for example, in a defamation case, there's been a very famous one recently that I imagine would have attracted quite a lot of media interest, as indeed it did outside the court. I'm sure they would have loved to have been filming it inside.
Which one were you thinking of?
It's the Johnny Depp libel action.
Of course, it had an English element, didn't
it?
it? Yeah. As well as the excitement in the United States. And of course, for the United States, this is meat and potatoes, isn't it? They love courtroom drama.
Yeah, they do. I think it's a difficult venue for filming because there are, and there always will be, very strict controls about how you film it, and essentially they only permit static footage, and that's not really what television is all about. It's television about movement.
Is that what they do in America?
I think it's different in America because you're able to film the court in its wider form.
I believe
but
so.
In England, you're just allowed to have a camera focused on the face of the advocate and the face of the judge.
Yes.
You're not allowed to show the witnesses. You're not allowed to show the jurors. So all the people that they really want to film, they're not allowed to, and they can't film it in a way that makes for good viewing. So it has quite limited application, actually.
Insomniacs only.
Pretty much. I mean, and in essence, it's really what Lord Neuberger said about it, in that it's being filmed to demonstrate confidence in the system, open justice, accessibility, so on and so forth. It's not being filmed for entertainment purposes.
No. And in the English context, the way that Lord Neuberger puts it, in fact, is the excuse for it.
Indeed, and frankly, the only justification. I mean, the fact that it's modern doesn't seem to me to justify it. It justifies it on the basis of open justice, and therefore all you need to know is what's being said in the court, not what it looks like.
No. So this is a debate that's, I don't know if you know this, it's a debate that's going on in Hong Kong at the moment. Should we or should we not have it?
Yes.
And your own view?
Well, I don't think there's any alternative now. I think you have to have it, and a modern world requires it, and therefore there's really no debate at the end of the day. But I'd say this against it. In my experience, jury trials work least well when it's a very high-profile defendant. So I've been in cases where a jury, I believe, has been influenced by the very, very high-profile nature of the case.
Yes.
And that is going to be exacerbated when it's filmed. And it puts an improper pressure on a jury. And because it's not a high-profile case if the person happens to be innocent, because it's only really high-profile if they are guilty, it brings an inappropriate pressure on a jury. And that is, I think, the best argument for not having it. And that has been considered, obviously, by the legislature, and they determined in England that it would be better to have open justice and not give weight to that argument. But that is a concern to me. I do think it tends to make personality cults out of barristers and judges, which I think is a bad thing. I mean, the O.J. Simpson trial is a classic example of that, and barristers are not personality cults, and it does tend to create that. So there is a problem with sensationalizing things, and there's a problem with the media circus. There's a problem with too much pressure on jurors. But as I say, I think it is inevitable now that it will come, because you just look fuddy-duddy and old-fashioned if you don't do it.
And heaven forbid that the English should look fuddy-duddy and old-fashioned.
Quite. We wouldn't dream of looking like that.
Tell me this. Is there an argument for saying, in the interests of justice, that if a defendant said that he didn't want it to be televised, that would trump the system, that the defendant would have the right to refuse it? Is that a possible compromise or not?
I don't believe so, and I don't think that would be right. What would be right would be if a defendant has a particular reason for why it shouldn't be. So there ought to be a room for each of the parties, and indeed the court, to give consideration to any particular circumstances in a case that might result in it not being televised.
So the court, the prosecution, the defence, if they've got special reasons, say so, and it can be determined by the court.
Yes, but it will be determined on the basis of the reason, not on the basis of who is asking for that.
Yes, I get it. So we will leave your personality to the jazz scene rather than amplifying it in court. I'm not sure it needs much amplification in court, if I may say so, Ian, actually. And as far as lawyers being boring is concerned, I'm going to suggest that we win the argument today, you and I, led by yourself, in suggesting that anyone that suggests that but lawyers are naturally boring is wrong.
I would say that's fundamentally wrong, and anybody thinking of coming to the bar particularly, but certainly to the law in general, I think would find it a fascinating job. It changes on a daily basis. You almost never do the same thing twice, and it's full of actually rather interesting people.
Good to hear. Thank you so much for coming along to Haldanes today and for participating in this podcast.
Thank you, Jonathan.